Duke had barely eaten in 5 days. The terrified German Shepherd refused every leash, avoided every hand, and kept staring at the shelter door for a man who would never return. Then a former Navy SEAL arrived to adopt a puppy. Cole wanted nothing to do with another German Shepherd, not after losing his K9 in combat, but when he whispered 2 familiar words, Duke lifted his head. 72 hours later, the dog carried something to Cole that left everyone on the porch in tears. Before we begin, tell us the city you're watching from in the comments, and please subscribe to support more heartfelt stories like this. Freezing rain silvered the streets of Bend, Oregon, while low clouds pressed against the pine-covered hills and turned the morning into a dim sheet of gray. Cole Bennett parked outside Pine Ridge Animal Rescue and kept both hands on the steering wheel after the engine stopped. At 42, the former Navy SEAL still had the disciplined build of a man trained to move before fear could speak. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered light skin, short, dark brown hair graying at the temples, a square jaw, and close-cropped brown stubble. Cole was polite with strangers, but difficult to know. Since his final deployment, he had begun measuring every room, sound, and exit without meaning to. The habit had once kept men alive. At home, it mostly kept him tired. Beside him sat Sarah Bennett, his 39-year-old wife. She was tall and slender, with warm ivory skin, hazel eyes, and shoulder-length auburn hair tucked into a cream scarf. Sarah had a gentle voice and stubborn patience shaped by 13 years of loving a man who often answered pain with silence. As an elementary school librarian, she had learned not to hurry frightened hearts. "You can still change your mind," she said. Cole glanced toward the back seat. A blue collar rested beside a leash, 3 rubber toys, and a blanket embroidered with the name, Charlie. "I thought changing my mind was what we were trying to avoid." Sarah smiled. "I meant about the squeaky duck. It looks emotionally unstable." A faint laugh escaped him. Her jokes reminded him his heaviness did not own every room. Charlie was a 10-week-old yellow Labrador puppy with round brown eyes, oversized paws, and the confidence of a creature that had never learned to expect cruelty. Sarah had chosen him carefully. A puppy came without military commands, old scars, or the black and tan silhouette that still entered Cole's dreams. Charlie would not resemble Rook, the German Shepherd K9 whose name Cole had not spoken in months. Inside, barking rolled through the lobby. The air smelled of disinfectant, damp fur, and reheated coffee. Cole signed the final adoption form. For the first time that morning, hope loosened something behind his ribs. Charlie needed food, training, patience, and a home. Those were problems Cole understood. They had almost reached the puppy wing when a woman stepped into their path. Linda Morales was 61, short and solidly built, with bronze-toned skin, silver-streaked black hair cut to her jaw, and watchful dark eyes. She had worked at Pine Ridge for 28 years and possessed the calm directness of someone who knew kindness sometimes required uncomfortable honesty. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "before you meet Charlie, could you give me 2 minutes?" Cole's expression tightened. "Is something wrong with the puppy?" "No. Charlie is healthy and ready." Linda glanced at Sarah. "This is another dog." Sarah touched Cole's sleeve, silently asking him not to retreat before he understood. Linda led them beyond the adoption rooms and down a colder hallway marked Staff Only. At the final door, she stopped beside a narrow observation window. Inside, a 5-year-old male German Shepherd lay pressed against the concrete wall. Duke had a large frame that should have looked powerful, but hunger had sharpened his ribs beneath a dull black and tan coat. His amber eyes faced the corner. His ears were pinned backward, and his tail curled beneath his body. A full bowl of food sat untouched nearby. "He has barely eaten in 5 days," Linda said. "Yesterday, a handler tried to attach a leash. Duke snapped at the air, so the report lists him as potentially aggressive." Cole studied the rigid shoulders, shallow breathing, and refusal to face the door. He had seen aggression. This was not aggression. This was an animal making itself small enough to survive whatever it believed was coming. Without entering, Cole lowered himself beside the window, turned slightly sideways, and kept his eyes down. "Easy, partner," he said. The words came in the quiet rhythm he had once used in Smoke and Darkness. The rhythm belonged to another dog and another life. Duke's left ear moved. Sarah stopped breathing. Linda gripped her jacket. Slowly, as though lifting his head required more courage than strength, Duke turned from the wall and looked directly at Cole. Linda's voice trembled. "He is scheduled to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility tomorrow morning, unless someone with the right experience agrees to foster him for 72 hours. Duke's amber eyes remained fixed on Cole through the observation window, as freezing rain traced crooked paths down the glass behind them. For several seconds, no one spoke. Cole stayed crouched beside the door, one shoulder angled away from the kennel so Duke would not feel challenged. What unsettled him was not the possibility that Duke might bite. It was the way the German shepherd's gaze touched a memory Cole had worked hard to bury. The upright ears, the black saddle, the quiet intelligence behind exhausted eyes. Rook had looked at him that way once, moments before the last mission broke both their lives apart. Cole stood. No. Linda did not pretend to misunderstand. "You haven't heard everything." "I heard enough. We came for Charlie. We prepared for a puppy. Duke needs trained rehabilitation, not a stranger making an emotional decision in a hallway." Linda's lined face remained calm. "You are not a stranger to him anymore. One look doesn't mean anything. It meant something to Duke." Cole turned toward the brighter end of the corridor, where distant puppy barks drifted through the walls. Charlie was waiting somewhere beyond those doors. Small, cheerful, uncomplicated. He had not imagined standing before a wounded German shepherd whose very shape felt like a doorway into the past. Sarah moved beside him. Her slender figure looked almost fragile beneath her rain-darkened coat, but her hazel eyes were steady. "You aren't afraid he'll hurt us," she said softly. Cole looked at her. "You're afraid of what he reminds you of." Sarah did not say Rook's name. She did not need to. Linda lowered her voice. "Duke was found 9 days ago in a small house outside Redmond. His owner was an older veteran who lived alone. The neighbors described him as thin, stooped, polite, and increasingly private after losing his wife." Cole's expression shifted. "A neighbor saw newspapers collecting on the porch," Linda continued. "When deputies entered, they found Duke beside an old armchair. His owner had died. Duke had gone without enough food or water, but whenever someone approached, he placed himself between them and the man. He was guarding him," Cole said, "or waiting for him to wake up." Linda glanced through the window. "They carried Duke out on a blanket. Since then, he watches every door. Every footstep makes him lift his head. Every time someone leaves, he waits for that person to return." Cole looked again. Duke had turned toward the wall, but one ear remained angled toward the hallway. "He doesn't understand death," Sarah whispered. "Maybe he understands it too well," Cole replied. Linda removed a shallow rubber bowl from a cabinet. "He hasn't taken water willingly since yesterday morning. Would you try?" "I already said no. I'm not asking you to take him home. I'm asking you to help him drink." That was harder to refuse. After Linda unlocked the door, Cole entered alone while she and Sarah remained at the threshold. The room smelled of antiseptic, wet concrete, and untouched food. Duke's body tightened immediately. His tail pressed farther beneath him, and his eyes followed Cole without blinking. Cole walked in a slow curve, placed the bowl several feet from Duke, then retreated and sat with his back partly turned. His training told him to watch Duke's breathing, shoulders, ears, and mouth. Another instinct told him to leave before the dog reached the part of him that still belonged to Rook. Outside, freezing rain clicked against the window. "Bad morning out there," Cole said quietly. "Roads will freeze before noon. Sarah will tell me she warned me." "She usually does." Sarah gave him a faint smile. Cole continued speaking about the ice bending the pines and the heater in his truck making a noise he had promised to repair 2 winters ago. The words did not matter. Their rhythm did. Duke's nose moved. Cole did not turn. A soft scrape came from behind him, then another. At last, the faint sound of a tongue touching water broke through the room. Sarah covered her mouth while Linda deliberately lowered her gaze. Cole stared at the concrete while something painful and hopeful tightened beneath his ribs. Duke took only a few laps before retreating, but he had chosen to drink. No hand had forced him. No leash had pulled him forward. When Cole stepped into the hallway, Sarah asked, "What happens to Charlie if we do this?" "There's a family on the backup list," Linda said, "a couple with 2 children. They visited Charlie twice and cried when they learned they were second. If you release the hold, they can take him home this afternoon." Cole pictured the embroidered blanket in the truck and felt grief for a puppy he had not held, followed by relief that Charlie would still have a family. He had expected Charlie to be the safe beginning Sarah believed he needed. Giving up that plan felt strangely like losing something, yet it also removed the last excuse he had for walking away from Duke. "This is not permanent," he said. 72 hours, Linda agreed. "Pine Ridge will provide food, medication, a crate, and emergency support. The rehabilitation center will take him after that." Sarah studied Cole. "Can you do 3 days?" He looked through the glass at Duke, who had returned to the wall but now lay closer to the water bowl. "I can do 72 hours, nothing more." The foster forms took 15 minutes. Cole read every condition twice, treating the temporary placement like an operational agreement rather than admitting that his hands had begun to shake when he signed Duke's name. When Linda returned with a soft fabric leash, Duke recoiled at the click of its clasp. His body flattened, his ears disappeared against his skull, and his breathing sharpened. "Don't attach it," Cole said. "Open the kennel and give him space." Linda hesitated. Her caution was not distrust of Cole, but the disciplined concern of a woman responsible for everyone in the room. "The corridor doors are secured," she said. "But if he panics, then we don't trap him again." After checking the outer door, Linda unlocked the kennel. The door swung inward. Duke remained frozen, staring at the opening as though freedom might be another kind of trap. Cole sat several feet away, sideways to the kennel. "No pulling," he said. "No reaching. He chooses." Minutes passed. Freezing rain whispered against the roof. Sarah's fingers tightened around the blue puppy collar tucked inside her coat, the last piece of the morning they had planned. Linda remained motionless beside the wall. Cole looked down at his open hands and felt the old ache spreading through his chest. Rook had always crossed any distance the moment Cole called. Duke owed him no such trust. "Easy, partner," he said softly. One paw appeared beyond the threshold. Duke stopped, trembling so hard that the muscles along his shoulders rippled beneath his dull coat. Cole kept his breathing slow. Duke placed the second paw forward. He did not move toward Linda or the open hallway. Slowly, painfully, he followed the one voice that had asked nothing from him. Cole did not reach out. He simply stayed where he was and let Duke choose the distance between them. Freezing rain rattled against the roof of Cole's truck as Bend disappeared behind a gray curtain of ice, blurred pines, and empty roads shining like dark glass. Duke remained pressed into the farthest corner of the secured transport crate on the back seat. The 5-year-old German Shepherd had made no sound since leaving Pine Ridge. He did not bark at passing vehicles, whine when the truck turned, or growl whenever Cole checked the rearview mirror. His large black and tan body stayed folded tightly against the crate wall, with his narrow muzzle resting above his front paws and his amber eyes fixed on the metal door. The silence felt more troubling than aggression would have. An angry dog still believed resistance might change something. Duke behaved like an animal who had learned that noise only made departures happen faster. Sarah sat in the passenger seat with the blue puppy collar hidden inside her coat pocket. Her tall, slender body was turned slightly toward the back, though she avoided staring directly at Duke. Damp strands of auburn hair had escaped her scarf, framing a pale face made softer by concern. "He hasn't looked away from the door," she whispered. Cole kept both hands on the wheel. "He's tracking the only exit. Because he wants to escape. Because he needs to know when someone leaves." The answer came too quickly. Cole recognized the behavior because he had lived a human version of it for years. Restaurants, grocery stores, waiting rooms. He always chose the seat facing the entrance. He told himself it was training, but training was only the respectable name he gave to fear after it became permanent. Every few miles he spoke to Duke in the same low, even rhythm he had used inside the shelter. He described the road, the ice gathering on fence posts, and the heater that blew warmer air on Sarah's side than his. Duke never lifted his head, but one ear occasionally shifted toward Cole's voice. That small movement was enough to keep Cole talking. Their home stood several miles outside Bend, a modest two-story cedar house surrounded by ponderosa pines and winter-browned grass. Cole had chosen the property after leaving the Navy because the long driveway offered privacy and an unobstructed view of anyone approaching. Sarah had chosen it because morning sunlight entered the kitchen and deer sometimes wandered near the fence. They had built two different meanings into the same walls. For her, it was a home. For him, it was defensible ground. Sarah opened the front door while Cole carried the crate beneath the covered porch. Inside, a thick grayed dog bed waited near the fireplace with a water bowl, a folded blanket, and several toys Sarah had originally bought for Charlie. The bright yellow ball looked painfully cheerful beside Duke's dark crate. Cole set the carrier down just inside the entryway and opened its door. Duke did not move. His eyes traveled from Cole to the unfamiliar hallway, then back to the open front door behind him. Sarah stepped farther into the house, giving him space. "We can wait," she said. Cole nodded and clipped the shelter's soft leash to Duke's collar, intending only to provide a safe guide if the dog bolted. The small metal clasp made a sharp click. Duke's reaction was immediate. His body slammed backward into the crate, ears flattening so tightly they nearly disappeared into his fur. His breathing changed from shallow silence to rapid, painful bursts. His claws scraped against the plastic floor as he tried to retreat through a wall that would not move. Cole froze. He had seen the same transformation in soldiers when a harmless sound became another place and another year. The present vanished. The body remained, but the mind returned to whatever had first taught it terror. "Remove the pressure," Cole murmured. He unclipped the leash slowly, then carried it across the room and placed it where Duke could still see it without hearing the hardware. Sarah watched Cole's face. "You knew what that sound would do?" "No." His jaw tightened. "But I know what it looks like when something small stops being small." Cole did not reach into the crate. He sat on the hardwood floor several feet inside the house, turned his body sideways, and rested his open hands on his knees. Cold air slipped through the open doorway and gathered around his boots. Sarah quietly brought him a jacket, then sat on the lowest stair, far enough away not to crowd Duke. Minutes passed. Freezing rain hissed beyond the porch. Duke stared at the threshold as if an invisible boundary had been drawn across it. Cole understood that crossing into the house meant more than entering a warm room. The last unfamiliar doorway Duke had crossed had taken him away from the man he had waited beside for 3 days. Perhaps every new place now felt like another stage of abandonment. "No one's pulling you," Cole said. "You can stay there until you decide otherwise." After 20 minutes, Duke stretched his nose toward the opening. After 40, one paw shifted forward, then withdrew. Sarah said nothing, though Cole could feel her patience beside him like steady heat. Nearly an hour after they arrived, Duke placed both front paws outside the crate. He stopped there, trembling. Cole lowered his gaze to the floor. Duke extended one rear leg, then the other, moving with the caution of a dog walking onto ice he expected to break. He crossed the threshold of the crate, paused at the entrance to the living room, and looked toward Cole. "That's enough," Cole said softly. "You don't owe us anything else tonight." Duke entered anyway, not because Cole commanded him, but because the quiet behind that voice appeared less dangerous than the open door behind him. He ignored the bed Sarah had prepared. Instead, Duke circled the living room once, keeping close to the walls, then positioned himself directly opposite the front entrance. He sat with his spine rigid, ears angled forward, and eyes locked on the door. Sarah placed food and water within reach, but Duke did not touch either. Each time the house settled or rain struck harder against the windows, his body tensed. By midnight, Sarah's eyes had grown heavy. She stood beside Cole and rested a hand against his broad shoulder. "Come upstairs," she said. "He needs quiet, and you need sleep." Cole looked at Duke. "He won't sleep. Neither will you if you stay here staring at him." She was right, which made leaving more difficult. Cole followed her upstairs, but the bedroom felt too far from the front door. He lay on his back in darkness, listening through the floorboards for claws, breathing, or the scrape of a body shifting position. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard a metal collar moving through smoke, Rook's identification tags striking once against a buckle, a sound so ordinary that it had become unbearable after the dog was gone. Cole opened his eyes again. Beside him, Sarah slept lightly, one hand resting near his arm as though even in sleep she knew he might need an anchor. Near dawn, Cole gave up pretending. He moved downstairs without turning on the overhead lights. A small lamp beside the sofa cast a warm, amber circle across the room. Duke was still sitting where Cole had left him. His head drooped with exhaustion, but each time his eyes began to close he forced them open and stared at the front door again. Cole recognized the cruelty of that discipline. Staying awake felt like protection until the body forgot how to rest. He lowered himself onto the floor several feet away. Duke watched him, but did not retreat. "Nothing's coming through that door," Cole said. His voice was rough from sleeplessness. "But I suppose you don't believe promises yet?" Duke's ears moved slightly. Cole leaned against the sofa, facing the entrance beside him. For a long time, neither moved. They sat like two sentries assigned to guard a house from enemies that existed only in memory. Gradually, Duke's rigid shoulders softened. His front legs slid forward. He lowered his chest to the floor, though his head remained lifted and his eyes stayed on the door. Cole did not praise him or move closer. He simply remained. Several minutes later, Duke rested his muzzle across his paws. His eyes closed for less than a second, opened again, then closed once more. This time, he allowed them to remain shut. He had not approached Cole. He had not accepted touch. But, for the first time since entering the house, Duke lay down while another person stayed awake beside him. On the second night, freezing rain hardened into glass along the pine branches while wind moved through the forest with the low, restless sound of something searching for a way inside. Duke had spent most of the day near the living room wall, no longer pressed tightly into the corner, but still positioned where he could see both the front door and the hallway. He had eaten several bites only after Cole left the room, and he had drunk from the water bowl when Sarah sat with her back turned. These were small victories, too fragile to celebrate aloud. Cole understood that frightened animals sometimes retreated the moment humans became excited about their progress. He also understood that people did the same thing, so he treated each improvement as ordinary. He moved slowly, kept his voice level, and never closed the distance Duke had not chosen to surrender. By evening, the German shepherd had begun tracking Cole from room to room with his eyes. He did not follow, but he noticed. Sarah noticed too. She sat on the couch with a book open across her lap, her auburn hair loosely tied behind her neck and her hazel eyes moving more often toward the dog than the page. "He watches you whenever you leave," she said. Cole stood near the fireplace, adding another log. His broad frame cast a long shadow across the floor. "He watches every exit." "Not like that." Cole did not answer. He had spent years learning how silence could end a conversation before it reached the place he feared. Outside, the wind strengthened. Ice tapped against the windows, and the old cedar house creaked beneath the changing temperature. Duke's ears shifted with every sound. His black and tan coat had begun to dry and soften, but his ribs still showed when he breathed. He remained a powerful-looking dog reduced by grief into something uncertain, as though his body remembered strength while his mind no longer trusted it. Cole watched him from the edge of his vision. Rook had once filled rooms differently. The former K9 had carried confidence like heat, moving through military compounds with a deep chest, alert brown eyes, and the absolute belief that Cole would always lead him home. That faith had been the most beautiful thing Cole had ever received, and the heaviest thing he had ever failed to return. A sharp crack split the night. Cole turned toward the windows just as a weighted pine branch collapsed across the utility line beyond the yard. Blue-white light flashed through the glass. The transformer exploded with a violent metallic boom that shook the walls and sent the house into darkness. At the same instant, Sarah startled near the kitchen counter and struck a hanging tray with her elbow. The aluminum pan fell, bounced once against the tile, and landed with a ringing crash. Duke erupted from the floor. He did not bark. He launched himself backward, claws scraping across the hardwood as he tried to force his body into the narrow space between the couch and the wall. His shoulders struck the furniture. He spun, unable to find an exit that felt safe, then drove himself into the darkest corner of the room. His breathing became harsh and rapid. Each attempt to retreat ended with his nails tearing at the floor, as if he believed enough effort might open a passage through the wall. "Duke," Sarah said, keeping her voice low, "it's all right." But Cole no longer heard her. The flash had become desert light. The transformer's boom stretched into an explosion rolling across dry earth. The fallen tray became the metallic strike of equipment hitting stone. Darkness filled with dust, radio static, and the terrible absence that followed a blast before the wounded began to cry out. Cole was no longer standing inside his home in Oregon. He was back in the final seconds of a mission he had spent years refusing to describe. Rook had been several yards ahead, his muscular body moving low through smoke. Cole remembered the dog turning sharply, ears rising as he detected something no human had seen. He remembered shouting the command to return. Rook had looked back once. There had been no fear in his face, only decision. Then the German shepherd launched himself toward Cole as the second charge detonated. Cole dropped to his knees in the dark living room, his chest locked around a breath that would not leave. One hand pressed against the floor while the other closed around empty air. He could feel Rook's weight again, could feel warm fur beneath his fingers and the violent rhythm of a heart failing faster than Cole could stop it. He remembered calling the dog's name, promising extraction, promising help, promising anything that might keep those eyes open. He had been trained to control bleeding, direct fire, and make decisions beneath impossible pressure. None of it had mattered. Rook had died with his head across Cole's arm while smoke covered the sky. "Cole," Sarah's voice reached him from far away. "Look at me." He could not. His shoulders shook despite the strength in them. His square jaw tightened until pain spread along his face, and his breath broke into short, uneven pulls. Sarah moved closer but stopped before touching him. She had learned that surprising Cole during a flashback could deepen the panic. Instead, she lowered herself several feet away, her slender form barely visible in the cold blue light entering through the iced windows. "You're home," she said. "You're in Bend. I'm here." In the corner, Duke trembled violently. His ears lay flat against his skull, and his amber eyes reflected the faint emergency light from the kitchen. He was trapped inside his own terror, yet his gaze moved toward Cole's broken breathing. For several seconds the dog remained pressed against the wall. Every instinct appeared to tell him to stay hidden. Then Cole made a sound, not a command, not even a word, but the raw, involuntary sound of someone losing the same thing again. Duke lifted his head. He took one step from the corner and froze. His legs shook beneath him. The fallen tray lay between him and Cole, its metal surface catching the dim light. Duke stared at it, then moved around it in a wide arc. He stopped again when the house creaked. His body dropped low, tail tucked, but he continued. Sarah watched without speaking. She understood that any encouragement might turn Duke's choice into pressure. Cole remained on his knees, eyes fixed on a battlefield no longer there. "I couldn't get him out," he whispered. "I told him to come back." Duke reached him. The German shepherd stood just beyond Cole's clenched hand. He sniffed once, flinched at the movement of Cole's shoulders, then lowered himself carefully. For the first time since arriving at the house, Duke crossed the final distance without being invited. He placed his head across Cole's knee. The weight was light because Duke was still too thin, but it broke through the memory more powerfully than Sarah's voice or the familiar walls. Cole stopped breathing for one stunned second. Beneath his hand was not Rook's thick coat, but Duke's rough, neglected fur. The heartbeat under it was fast, frightened, and alive. Slowly, Cole opened his fist. He rested his palm against Duke's chest instead of reaching over his head. Duke flinched but did not retreat. Their hearts seemed to race against each other, both bodies waiting for danger that had already passed. "It's over," Cole whispered. His voice cracked. "It's over. You're here." He repeated the words until his breathing began to lengthen. Duke's breaths remained uneven, but the violent trembling softened. Cole did not know whether he was speaking to the dog beside him, to the K9 he had lost, or to the part of himself still kneeling in smoke. Perhaps all three had been waiting to hear the same thing. Sarah remained nearby, tears shining in her hazel eyes. She had entered the room believing Duke was the one who needed rescue. Now she saw the truth unfolding in the darkness. They had not brought home a broken dog for Cole to repair. They had brought home a creature who understood the exhaustion of surviving after the one person he trusted was gone. Duke had been terrified, yet he had left his hiding place because Cole sounded alone. In doing so, he had offered the first touch between them, and Cole, who had believed love always ended with something dying in his arms, finally allowed his hand to remain where a living heart could feel it. Morning arrived pale and cold after the storm, with broken pine branches scattered across the yard and a thin crust of ice shining beneath the returning electricity. Cole woke on the living room floor with his back against the couch and one hand resting near Duke's front paws. The German shepherd had remained beside him after the explosion, though sometime before dawn he had moved a few inches away, as if embarrassed by the closeness he had chosen in the dark. Sarah entered quietly from the kitchen carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Her auburn hair was loosely gathered at the nape of her neck, and exhaustion softened the hazel eyes that had watched over both of them during the night. She handed 1 mug to Cole and glanced at Duke. He stayed. Cole looked at the dog's amber eyes, which were open but no longer fixed entirely on the front door. "So did I." Sarah gave him a tired smile. Before either could say more, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Linda had arranged for Pine Ridge's veterinarian to visit the house rather than force Duke into another unfamiliar building. Dr. Naomi Reed was 48, compact and athletic, with warm brown skin, short black curls streaked with silver, and calm dark eyes behind thin rectangular glasses. She wore navy scrubs beneath a weatherproof jacket and carried herself with the patient confidence of someone who had learned that frightened animals noticed tension before humans admitted feeling it. Naomi had spent 16 years working with rescue dogs, and a scar across the back of one hand came from an early mistake she never hid because it reminded younger staff that experience should produce humility, not arrogance. She entered without approaching Duke directly. "No examination table," she said. "No sudden handling. We work where he is." Cole appreciated the absence of ceremony. Naomi sat several feet away and watched Duke's posture, breathing, and response to movement. She asked Cole to walk across the room, then Sarah, observing the dog's eyes. Duke followed Cole more closely than anyone else, but when Naomi gently touched the metal clasp of her medical bag, his ears flattened. "Noise sensitivity," she murmured, but not generalized aggression. She placed a soft strip of chicken on the floor and slid it toward him. Duke sniffed, but did not eat. When Naomi turned her head away, he took it. "He wants food," she said. "Fear is still negotiating the price." Cole noticed something pressed beneath the thick fur around Duke's neck. The old leather collar had remained on him since the rescue, dark brown and cracked from age. Naomi asked Cole to sit beside Duke without touching him. After several minutes, Duke shifted closer on his own. Cole slowly placed 2 fingers against the dog's chest, avoiding the top of his head. Duke's muscles tightened, then eased. Naomi unfastened the collar with a padded tool that made almost no sound. The underside of the leather was worn nearly smooth, but beneath a layer of grime, Naomi found a faded sequence stamped into the material. "This isn't a military number," she said. "It looks like a county service animal registration." Linda, standing near the doorway in her worn denim jacket, photographed the code and called Pine Ridge. 20 minutes later, the shelter database produced a name: George Whitaker, 69 years old, retired Army medic. A second number belonged to his daughter. Cole stared at the collar in Naomi's gloved hands. The name turned Duke's grief from an abstract wound into a specific absence. Someone had once spoken to him every morning, filled his bowl, and expected him beside the chair at night. Someone had been the center of his world, and that person had vanished without explanation. The call came shortly before noon. Sarah set a tablet on the coffee table so Cole and Linda could speak with George's daughter through video. Laura Whitaker was 44, a narrow-faced woman with fair freckled skin, tired green eyes, and dark blonde hair cut unevenly at her shoulders, as though personal care had become less important during the weeks following her father's death. She worked as a respiratory therapist in Spokane, and possessed the practical, careful manner of someone accustomed to remaining calm while other people struggled to breathe. Grief, however, had thinned that composure. The moment Duke appeared in the corner of the screen, Laura pressed her fingers against her lips. "That's him," she whispered. "That's Duke." At the sound of his name in her voice, Duke lifted his head. Laura's eyes filled. She explained that Duke had never been a military attack dog, police K-9, or protection animal. George had adopted him from a rural rescue when Duke was 18 months old, nearly a year after George's wife, Margaret, died from cancer. George had been a tall, once powerful man with a narrow white mustache, deep-set blue eyes, and a back permanently bent by decades of carrying medical packs and later by arthritis. He had been gentle with patients, stubborn with family, and increasingly withdrawn after losing his wife. Duke became the reason he rose every morning. They walked at dawn, ate breakfast together, and spent afternoons beside the same old armchair near the front window. "My father talked to him like another soldier," Laura said. "Short sentences, low voice, hand signals when he didn't feel like speaking." She demonstrated 2 simple gestures. Cole recognized their similarity to the signals he had once used with Rook, not identical, but close enough to explain why Duke responded to his posture and tone. Laura continued, her voice unsteady. George's heart had failed while he was sitting in his chair. Duke remained beside him for almost 3 days before a neighbor called authorities. When deputies entered, Duke stood between them and George. He did not charge or bite. He blocked the way, growled when they reached forward, and refused to follow a leash. The responders finally used a blanket and transport board to move him. "He wasn't attacking them," Laura said. "He thought they were taking my father away." Cole looked toward Duke. The dog had returned his gaze to the front door. Suddenly, every night spent watching the entrance made sense. Duke was not searching for an escape. He was waiting for footsteps he remembered. He was waiting for George to walk through the door and restore the world to its proper shape. "He still thinks George might come back," Sarah said. Laura nodded, wiping her cheek. "My father never left him before. Not overnight. Not once." After the call ended, Cole carried the old collar to the kitchen table. He wanted to believe understanding Duke's grief would make the next decision easier. Instead, it deepened the responsibility. Duke was not an aggressive dog requiring correction. He was a loyal animal trapped inside a promise no one could fulfill. By afternoon, the ice began melting from the roof in steady drops. Cole sat at the table with a chicken sandwich while Sarah completed paperwork for Pine Ridge. Duke had moved closer than usual, lying near the edge of the kitchen rather than guarding the front door. Cole turned to answer Sarah's question about medication. A soft movement brushed his elbow. When he looked back, half the chicken had vanished. Duke stood 3 feet away with the stolen meat in his mouth. He swallowed quickly, then lowered his head and stepped backward, ears flattening as though punishment were certain. Cole stared at the wounded remains of his lunch. "You refused food for 5 days," he said, "and your first serious meal is my sandwich?" Sarah laughed before she could stop herself. The sound was light and surprised, the first true laughter the house had held since Duke arrived. Cole tried to remain stern, but the dog's guilty expression defeated him. A laugh escaped his chest, rough from disuse, but real. Duke looked between them. Then his tail touched the floor once. The small thump silenced them more effectively than any dramatic gesture could have. It was not joy yet, but it was the first movement that did not come from fear. Cole was still smiling when his phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen even though she had left less than an hour earlier. Her voice was gentle when he answered. "The rehabilitation transport confirmed tomorrow morning," she said. "Cole, you have less than 24 hours left." Cole looked at Duke, who had settled beneath the table, close enough that one paw rested beside his boot. For the first time, 72 hours no longer felt temporary. Morning came clear and painfully bright after 3 days of ice, the storm clouds pulling away from Bend and leaving every pine branch glittering beneath a cold blue sky. Cole had been awake since before sunrise. He moved through the living room with the controlled efficiency he once used while packing equipment before a mission, placing Duke's medication, food, medical notes, blanket, and old leather collar into a dark canvas bag. Each item had a purpose. Each movement helped him avoid looking at the German Shepherd lying near the kitchen entrance. Duke had eaten breakfast while Cole remained in the room, a milestone that should have felt encouraging. Instead, it made the approaching departure harder. The 5-year-old dog was still thin, but his black and tan coat no longer seemed entirely dull, and his amber eyes followed Cole from the food container to the folded blanket, and finally to the bag waiting beside the front door. He understood that objects gathered near an exit usually meant someone was leaving. Cole told himself the rehabilitation center was the right place. It had fenced exercise yards, veterinary supervision, behavior specialists, and staff trained to work with dogs carrying severe grief and fear. His house offered only 2 people, one quiet yard and a former SEAL who still woke believing there was smoke in his lungs. Keeping Duke might not be compassion. It might be guilt wearing a kinder face. Perhaps Cole was trying to save this German Shepherd because he had failed to save Rook. Perhaps every gentle word, every patient hour, and every night spent on the living room floor had been part of an apology offered to the wrong dog. Sarah stood at the kitchen counter, watching him fold Duke's blanket for the second time. Her tall, slender figure was dressed in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, and her auburn hair fell loosely around her shoulders. The morning light revealed the exhaustion beneath her hazel eyes, but it did not weaken their steady honesty. Sarah had always understood that Cole preferred difficult tasks to difficult feelings. A task could be measured, completed, and checked. Grief refused to follow instructions. "The blanket was already folded," she said. "It fit better this way." "It fits exactly the same way." Cole placed it inside the bag without answering. Sarah approached slowly. "You've been explaining why the center is qualified since 5 o'clock this morning." "Because it is." "I didn't say it wasn't." Cole pulled the zipper closed. The sound caused Duke's ears to shift backward, though he did not retreat. "They know what they're doing," Cole said. "He needs more than we can provide." "Maybe." Sarah stopped on the other side of the bag. "But that isn't the question you're avoiding." Cole's square jaw tightened beneath his close brown stubble. "I'm not avoiding anything." "Then look at me." He did. Sarah's expression held no accusation, only the weary tenderness of someone who loved him enough to risk his anger. "Are you sending Duke away because it is truly best for him?" she asked. "Or because you're afraid to love another German Shepherd and lose him too?" Cole opened his mouth, but no answer came. Images rose before he could stop them. Rook turning through smoke, Duke crossing the dark living room, one heart stopping beneath his hand while another had recently raced against it. "He isn't Rook," Sarah said. I know that. Do you? Her voice softened. Because sometimes you look at Duke and see everything you lost. Other times you look at him and punish yourself for wanting something new. Cole turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, melting ice slid from the roof in clear drops. Rook trusted me to bring him home. Rook chose to protect you, and died for it. That was not your choice. It was my responsibility. Sarah stepped closer but did not touch him. Duke is not asking you to rewrite that day. He is asking whether there is room for him in this one. At 9:30, the low rumble of a vehicle reached the house. Duke rose before Cole looked toward the driveway. A white rehabilitation van came slowly between the pines, its tires breaking thin plates of ice along the gravel. Linda stepped from the passenger side wearing her familiar denim jacket beneath a heavy green coat. Her short, solid frame seemed smaller in the bright morning, and the silver streaks in her black hair caught the sunlight. She had brought a transport specialist named Aaron Pike, a 36-year-old man with a lean build, medium brown skin, closely shaved hair, and a narrow, thoughtful face. A quiet scar crossed his chin, and his patient movements suggested a man who had learned not to prove courage by frightening animals. Aaron had worked with fearful rescue dogs for 8 years after leaving a county animal control position where too many rushed decisions had ended badly. He remained beside the van rather than approaching Duke, allowing Linda to handle the transition. Cole opened the front door and carried the canvas bag outside. The cold air entered the house, carrying the scent of wet pine and diesel. Duke followed as far as the threshold. He looked at Cole, then at Linda, then toward the open van. His body stiffened. His tail lowered, but he did not flatten himself or run. Linda crouched sideways several yards away. "Hello, Duke," she said gently. "No one is going to rush you." Cole placed the bag on the van's lower step. "His medication schedule is inside. He ate this morning. He still reacts to metal sounds, especially clips and dropped pans." Aaron nodded from a respectful distance. "We'll use a fabric loop until he's comfortable." Cole appreciated the answer, yet it made the departure feel more real. Everything was prepared. There was no practical reason to delay. Duke stepped onto the porch. His nails clicked softly against the boards. He looked toward the van again, then lifted his head toward Cole. For a moment, Cole thought the dog might move closer. Instead, Duke turned sharply and disappeared back into the house. Linda rose. "Give him a minute." "He's hiding," Cole said. "Maybe," Sarah replied from the doorway. "Or maybe he forgot something." Silence settled over the porch. Cole could hear Duke moving inside, claws crossing the hardwood, then stopping. Several seconds passed. Aaron remained still. Linda looked at Cole but offered no encouragement that might become pressure. Then Duke reappeared. Something hung from his mouth. It was the soft leash Cole had left on the low bench beside the living room wall, the same leash whose metal clasp had sent Duke crashing backward into the transport crate on his first day. Duke held the padded middle section carefully between his teeth, allowing the clasp to trail without striking the floor. He crossed the room, paused at the doorway, and stepped onto the porch. His legs trembled once, but he continued. Cole could not move. Duke walked past Sarah and stopped directly in front of him. Then the German Shepherd lowered his head and placed the leash into Cole's open hand. He sat beside the front door. No command had been given. No treat had guided him. Duke had looked at the waiting vehicle, returned to the house, and brought back the object that connected a dog to the person walking beside him. The meaning was not obedience. It was choice. Cole sank to his knees. Duke's ears shifted backward, but he did not withdraw when Cole brought his forehead gently against the dog's broad head. "You are not Rook," Cole whispered. His voice shook. "You don't have to be him. You don't have to save me, and I don't get to use you to fix what happened." Duke breathed against his jacket. Cole closed his fingers around the leash. "But if you're choosing this house, I'm choosing you too." Linda wiped quickly beneath one eye. Sarah smiled through tears, her hands folded against her chest. Aaron quietly closed the van door, understanding that the morning's destination had changed. Cole told Linda he wanted to begin the permanent adoption process with continued veterinary and behavioral supervision. Linda nodded, explaining that Pine Ridge could convert the placement into a monitored foster-to-adopt arrangement immediately. There would be evaluations, follow-up visits, and no expectation that Duke's fear would disappear simply because he had chosen to stay. Cole agreed to all of it. He attached the leash slowly, wrapping his hand around the fabric so the clasp would not swing. Duke flinched at the faint click, but kept his place beside Cole. Together, they turned away from the van. Duke crossed the threshold into the cedar house with the leash connecting him to the man he had chosen. Not as a replacement for someone lost, but as the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find. 6 months later, the last snow had vanished from the roads around Bend, leaving the ponderosa pines dark with spring rain and the high desert hills washed in soft green beneath a wide, clear sky. Duke stood in the front yard with the sunlight warming the black saddle of his coat. At 5.5 years old, the German Shepherd no longer looked like the hollow-bodied animal Cole had first seen pressed against a shelter wall. His ribs had disappeared beneath a healthy muscle, his tan chest had filled out, and his once dull fur had grown thick and glossy. The amber eyes remained watchful, but they no longer searched every doorway with desperate expectation. When Cole crossed the yard carrying a length of garden hose, Duke followed at an easy distance, nose lowered to the wet grass. A metal nozzle slipped from Cole's hand and struck the stone path. Duke flinched, one paw lifting instinctively, but he did not run. He looked at Cole, took a slow breath, and resumed investigating a patch of clover. Progress had not erased fear. It had simply taught Duke that fear did not always deserve control. Cole understood the difference because he was learning it too. The former Navy SEAL still woke some nights with his broad shoulders rigid beneath the sheets and his close-cropped hair damp with sweat. In those moments, the bedroom vanished beneath desert smoke, and Rook's final heartbeat returned beneath his hand. But Duke had developed a quiet ritual. He would rise from the rug beside the bed, approach without jumping, and rest his heavy head on the mattress near Cole's arm. He never barked or pawed. He simply waited until Cole opened his eyes and recognized the room. Cedar walls, pale moonlight, Sarah sleeping nearby, and one living German Shepherd breathing beside him. Duke did not drag Cole from the past through force. He stood at its edge and gave him somewhere to return. Sarah watched those changes without announcing each one as a victory. Her tall, slender frame often appeared in the bedroom doorway during the early mornings, auburn hair falling loose over one shoulder and hazel eyes softened by relief. She had learned that healing sometimes retreated when stared at too closely. Instead, she let ordinary life carry the evidence. Duke began sleeping through thunderstorms. Cole stopped checking every window before bed. The leash remained beside the door without frightening either of them. Some afternoons, Duke stole one of Sarah's socks and carried it through the house with the solemn dignity of a decorated officer transporting classified material. Cole insisted the dog had no sense of humor. Sarah argued that Duke simply had excellent judgment regarding whose laundry deserved capture. Their laughter no longer startled him. On one Saturday morning, Linda sent a photograph from Pine Ridge. Charlie, now an 8-month-old yellow Labrador with long legs, oversized paws, and the same round brown eyes, was asleep on his back between two smiling children. The younger child had covered him with a superhero blanket, while the older one had placed a stuffed duck beneath his paw. The family had adopted Charlie the same afternoon Cole and Sarah released their hold. In later photographs, Charlie appeared swimming in a lake, destroying a birthday hat, and sleeping across all 3 cushions of a couch while his family crowded onto the floor. Cole studied each picture longer than he admitted. The life they had prepared for Charlie had not disappeared. It had simply found another address. That knowledge removed the last shadow of guilt from his decision to choose Duke. Cole had also begun spending 2 mornings a week at Pine Ridge. At first, he repaired kennel doors, replaced damaged fencing, and avoided conversations that lasted longer than necessary. Linda understood his methods and assigned him practical work until he began offering something more valuable than labor. He started sitting outside the kennels of dogs who would not approach anyone. He did not promise immediate recovery. he simply remained. Over time, other veterans joined him. Marcus Hale was a 57-year-old former Army engineer with dark skin, a shaved head, a thick gray beard, and large hands made careful by years of building bridges in places where roads ended. After losing his wife to a sudden stroke, Marcus had stopped speaking to most of his friends and spent nearly a year eating dinner alone in front of the television. At Pine Ridge, he formed a quiet bond with a senior hound who trembled whenever doors closed. Rebecca Sloan was 46, a former Air Force flight nurse with a strong, compact build, sun-browned skin, cropped blonde hair, and pale blue eyes that had seen too many young service members arrive unconscious. She was direct, practical, and deeply compassionate, though grief had made her impatient with empty reassurance. Rebecca fostered a scarred, mixed-breed dog that refused to sleep unless someone sat nearby. Together with Linda, Cole, Marcus, Rebecca, Dr. Naomi Reed, and several shelter volunteers, they created a supervised foster network called Second Watch. The name came from the lonely hours after midnight, when fear often returned and people or animals needed someone else to remain awake beside them. The program matched carefully screened veterans with rescue dogs who needed calm, temporary homes, but it never treated the animals as medicine or the veterans as damaged handlers waiting to be repaired. Each placement included veterinary evaluations, behavioral plans, home visits, and support from Pine Ridge. Cole insisted on that rule. Love mattered, but love without preparation could become another form of pressure. During the first 3 months, Second Watch placed 7 dogs into temporary care. 4 later found permanent families, 2 remained with their foster veterans, and 1 returned to Pine Ridge after the match proved unsuitable. Cole considered that return a success because no one had forced a frightened dog or lonely person to remain in the wrong home. One evening, after the final Second Watch meeting of the month, Cole returned home carrying a small wooden display board he had built in the Pine Ridge workshop. Sarah found him in the living room beneath the warm light of the floor lamp. Duke lay nearby, chewing slowly on a rubber toy and occasionally glancing toward Cole. On the board, Cole mounted Rook's old collar. The leather was scratched and faded, and the metal identification tags had lost their shine. For years, Cole had kept it sealed inside a box because looking at it felt like opening a wound. He had believed that placing it where others could see would reduce Rook's sacrifice to decoration. Now he understood memory did not need darkness to remain sacred. Beside the collar, he placed Duke's new leash, made of soft brown leather with quiet padded hardware chosen to avoid the sharp metal click that had once terrified him. Sarah stood beside Cole and slipped her hand into his. "They look right together," she said. Cole studied the 2 objects. "I used to think making room for Duke meant moving Rook out. And now?" Cole looked down at the German Shepherd on the rug. Duke had stopped chewing and was watching him, ears relaxed. "Now, I think the heart is bigger than the room we lock it inside." Later that night, rain began tapping gently against the windows. Cole sat in his chair with Duke stretched across the floor near his boots. Months earlier, the dog would have positioned himself facing the front entrance, body rigid and ears waiting for footsteps that would never come. Tonight, Duke turned in a slow circle and lay down with his back toward the door. His head rested against Cole's foot, and within minutes his breathing deepened into sleep. Cole looked at the vulnerable curve of Duke's spine and understood what the posture meant. The dog was no longer guarding the house alone. He trusted the people inside it to guard him. Cole leaned back, listening to the rain and the steady breath at his feet. Rook's collar hung on the wall, not as an accusation, but as proof of a love that had existed fully and ended bravely. Duke's leash beside it represented a different love, one that had not replaced the first but had grown from the life left afterward. Cole had spent years believing happiness would betray the dog who died saving him. Now he understood that refusing to live would not honor Rook. Living with courage, patience, and an open heart might. Sarah turned off the hallway light and paused beside his chair. Cole reached for her hand. Duke slept through the movement. Two sentries who had once believed rest was dangerous finally allowed the night to pass without watching every door. And in the quiet cedar house among the pines, Cole and Duke continued forward. Not because the past had released them, but because they had learned they could carry it without letting it lead. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, on four tired paws, carrying a broken heart toward another broken heart. Cole believed his past had closed every door to joy, while Duke believed love always ended in loss. Yet God placed them in the same room and gave each of them a reason to stay. In daily life, we may not see the purpose behind delays, disappointments, or unexpected turns, but mercy often hides inside the path we never planned to take. A kind word, a patient hand, or simply refusing to walk away can become someone else's miracle. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about the second chance you are praying for, and subscribe for more stories of faith, healing, and love. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide your steps.